You ever stop and wonder why our world is, well, the way it is? I mean, why do we argue so much about free markets or social safety nets or national borders? It turns out a lot of the code, the operating system, if you will, for our biggest modern debates was actually written way back in the 19th century. So let's get into it and explore that legacy. Right, so we're going to look at these three huge ideas, these isms that totally reshaped everything. The best way to think about it is like a story of action and then reaction. It's this domino effect that all kicked off with one single, powerful new engine that literally changed the world.
And that engine? Yep, it was industrial capitalism. And you've got to understand, this wasn't just some new way to make a quick buck. No, this was a massive, disruptive force. It completely tore apart the old ways of life, creating unbelievable new wealth on one hand, and, you guessed it, unbelievable new problems on the other.
Okay, so what are we even talking about when we say capitalism? Well, at its core, it's a pretty simple idea, but it was totally radical for its time. It's this: private people, not the government or the whole village, get to own the stuff that makes stuff. You know, the tools, the factories, the land, all the means of production. And the whole point? The goal is to make a profit in a competitive market, usually by paying people wages to do the work.
And the first place to really jump in with both feet was the United Kingdom. I mean, they went all in. Starting way back in the 1760s, you had this huge revolution in textiles, coal, and iron. You combine that with a government policy that was basically hands-off, they called it laissez-faire, and boom, the UK becomes the absolute, undisputed economic heavyweight of the world.
But here's the thing, not everyone just copied the British model. Over in France, it was a whole different story. Their industrialization was a bit slower, and the government was way more involved. I'm talking about the state stepping in to fund massive projects like railways to kind of steer the economy. So it was much more of a controlled, top-down thing, you know? A real contrast to the British free-for-all.
Then you've got Germany. Germany was kind of late to the party, right? They didn't really get going until after they unified as a country in 1871. But man, when they started, they took off like a rocket. Their version was what historians call organized capitalism. Think huge industrial groups or cartels working hand in glove with the big banks and the government to completely own industries like steel and chemicals.
Okay, so you've got this absolute explosion of industrial production. And all these new factories, they had a ravenous appetite, a hunger. And for the people in charge, the next step was obvious. It wasn't just about making more stuff, it was about controlling more. They needed a never-ending stream of cheap raw materials to feed the machines. And they needed new places, new captive markets to sell all the stuff they were making. And that hunger, well, that's what fueled the age of imperialism.
Now, we're not talking about just setting up a few friendly trading posts here. Oh no. This new imperialism in the late 1800s was something else entirely. It was an aggressive, super competitive, and often brutal scramble for territory, especially across Africa and Asia. It was this high-stakes game driven by two things: profit and national pride. And, really troublingly, it was often justified by some awful ideas about racial superiority.
So, let's just pause for a second. We've got this brand new world of factories and empires. It's creating staggering wealth for a few people, but it's coming at a huge cost for so many others, both back home in the factories and out in the colonies. And this is where we get to the Great Reaction. See, socialism wasn't some idea that just popped up out of thin air. It grew directly out of the soil that capitalism and imperialism had churned.
And the why behind this new way of thinking? It was crystal clear. At its very heart, socialism was a gut reaction to the tough, harsh realities of this new industrial age. We're talking about dangerous factories, the crazy gap between the super rich and the desperately poor, and a system that just felt, well, exploitative. And that feeling applied to both the workers in the cities and the people living under colonial rule.
So here's the key difference, right? If capitalism was all about private ownership, socialism flipped the script completely. It was about collective ownership. The big idea was, hey, what if the workers, or society as a whole, owned the factories and the tools? Then the economy could be run to benefit everybody, putting things like social welfare and equality first, instead of just maximizing profit for a handful of owners.
But, and this is a big but, not all socialists agreed on how to actually do this. It wasn't one single idea. It was more like a bunch of different flavors. And these ideas were spreading like wildfire through new workers' unions and pamphlets. You had the utopians, who were trying to build these perfect little cooperative towns. You had democratic socialists who wanted to work within the system, through elections. And then you had the anarchists who were like, let's just get rid of the state altogether.
Out of all those different streams, though,
One was way more influential than the rest: scientific socialism. This is the one developed by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Their core argument was that all of human history was basically one long story of class struggle. It was the owners versus the workers, what they called the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. And they believed that this struggle was eventually going to end in a massive revolution, leading to a whole new communist society.
And this wasn't all just theory, by the way. Here's a cool little fact. Long before Marx was talking about revolution, you had guys like Robert Owen, a utopian socialist, who were actually trying to build these perfect societies right now. He literally bought a whole town in Indiana in 1825, called it New Harmony, and tried to create a real-life cooperative utopia. Now, it didn't exactly last, but it just goes to show you the powerful idealism that was fueling these early socialist thinkers.
Okay, so let's recap where we are. We've got this huge economic earthquake caused by capitalism. Then we have this powerful philosophical aftershock in the form of socialism. People's entire lives were being turned upside down. Think about it. You're moving from a farm to a crowded city. You're going from being a subject of a king to being a worker in a giant factory. All of this created a massive identity crisis. And that led to this one huge, echoing question. Who are we? You know, if you're not defined by your village anymore, or the craft you do, or your local lord, what is it that actually connects you to other people? What binds you all together? The most powerful world-changing answer to that question was the third big ism: nationalism.
So, what is nationalism? In a nutshell, it's the idea that people are naturally divided into these groups called nations, and that every one of these nations deserves to have its own country, its own state. It's all about being loyal to your nation, this big community of people you feel connected to. But, and this is the crucial part, what exactly is that connection based on? Well, two very different answers to that question came out of this period.
First up, you've got the French model, which really came out of the French Revolution. This is what we call civic nationalism. And the idea here is that the nation isn't about your bloodline or what language you speak. Nope. It's a community of citizens who all agree to follow the same rules and share the same political values. You know, things like liberty, equality, fraternity. You're part of the nation because you buy into the project.
But then you have the German model, which gave a totally different answer. This is ethnic nationalism. And in this view, the nation is defined by things you're born with: a shared ancestry, a common language, a collective culture, what was known as the Volk. You don't choose this. You don't sign up. You're just born into it. It's about blood and heritage, not some political agreement. So let's just lay this out side by side, because it's a really fundamental split. On one side, civic nationalism. It's open. It's based on choosing to be part of a political system. In theory, anyone can join. On the other side, ethnic nationalism. It's exclusive. Membership isn't a choice. It's inherited. It's based on your ancestry. One unites people with shared laws and institutions, the other unites them with blood and tradition. And this exact division? We still see it playing out in arguments about citizenship all over the world today.
And just to add one more layer, there was kind of a third way too, which was super important, especially outside of Europe. This was cultural nationalism. This was all about focusing on and reviving a shared culture and heritage. Sometimes it was a form of resistance, a way to push back against colonial rulers, like in India. Other times, it was a way to modernize and get powerful without losing your unique identity, which is exactly what we saw happen in Meiji Japan.
So there you have it. Three titanic forces, all unleashed in the 19th century. One driving the economy, one questioning if that economy was fair, and one trying to figure out who we even are. And make no mistake, these ideas didn't just fade away into the history books. They built the very foundation for the world we live in, setting the stage for the huge conflicts of the 20th century and, let's be honest, for the debates we're still having right now. Look, if we boil it all down to its absolute essence, this is what you get. Capitalism is driven by profit. Socialism is driven by a desire for equality, and nationalism is driven by the search for identity. Profit, equality, identity. These three forces are still locked in this constant tug of war, and they're the things that continue to shape our politics, our societies, our entire world.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to chew on. When you look at the world today, with our global economy all interconnected, but also with these powerful national feelings making a comeback, which of these 19th century ideas do you think has the strongest grip on our future? Is it the fight over our economic systems, or is it that deeper, more primal question of national identity, of who we are?